conversations, transmissions that occurred before an attack to give some kind of indication, even if we didn't understand them till after the attack? Is it unusual that with so many prongs to an attack that there wouldn't have been some type of warning through intelligence sources?
Well, it's a myth that we always know that these things are coming down. Part of our problem is, and we just had a warning go out to our embassies and military bases in the Far East. That could have been a feint. That could have been a diversion. We have so many warnings these days that people, they tend to fade into the background noise unless we have real specific information about an upcoming attack. Generally, we don't take action. And these groups are very hard to penetrate. They're focused with bonds of kinship and people who have known each other for years. So it doesn't surprise me that we didn't know that this was coming.
All right, Mr. Livingston, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Benjamin Levy is at the scene near the World Trade Center. Actually, he's going to tell us precisely where he is and what he saw. Benjamin, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello, Benjamin?
Yes?
Hi, it's Katie Couric. Can you tell me where you are and what you have seen or what you are seeing?
Well, right now I'm in Lower Manhattan, but I was working, I work at the Federal Building behind City Hall. And we were just sitting at our desks about 9 a.m. this morning. We heard a big explosion. Then about 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes later, we saw the other plane hit the building, the second tower, and then we just evacuated. And as we started to walk away, we turned around about maybe 15 minutes after we left the building, and the second tower just disappeared from sight. And I tell you, I've never seen anything more horrible in my entire life.
Did you see any people, any casualties, Mr. Levy?
We we bumped into a guy from Tower 1 who said that he had a chance to get out of the building after the plane hit the first one. He had a chance to get out of the second one, but he said that people were jumping out of the windows to get away from the fire.
Where are you now, Benjamin?
I'm in a hair salon in Lower Manhattan.
Well, this just rolled. We're listening to a live feed from NBC News, Tom Brokaw and Katie Couric and those folks, who we determined would have the best information and the most up-to-the-minute information. So certainly a lot more than we would have. We'll go back to them in a second, but this just from Associated Press, the Taliban in Afghanistan has denied any involvement with this attack in both New York City and Washington, D.C. They have been sheltering Osama bin Laden, so I don't know what that means, but
Not a lot, I wouldn't think.
I mean, the fact that they aren't taking credit for it doesn't mean that we... Anyway, let's get back and listen to NBC News.
All the other commercial buildings, they've all been evacuated as well.
Well, yeah, as we were leaving, the police were telling all the shop owners to shut their shops and go home.
And that must be enveloped by the smoke and dust and everything that we see now, because that covers the entire lower end of Manhattan, which is a considerably large area, not only physically, but in terms of the financial networks, the commerce that is done there, a lot of residential areas.
Yeah, you could smell the smoke, and you could smell it, but it wasn't. We were walking away from it.
Benjamin Levy. Benjamin, thanks so much for talking with us. We appreciate it, and we're glad you're safe.
Katie, I've got just a little rundown here, if I can, Matt, for just a moment about what's going on around the country. The State Department officials have been moved into the State Department Training Center in Arlington, Virginia. The state has been evacuated, obviously. In Minneapolis, St. Paul International Airport shut down. The IDS Center in downtown Minneapolis, tallest building, evacuated. Georgia, all flights at Hartsfield Atlanta International Airport closed. The CNN Center, world headquarters of Cable News Network, was closed to the public. In Maryland, officials are tightening security throughout the state. Of course, that's the home of Andrews Air Force Base. Navy installations throughout the Hampton Roads, home to the world's largest Navy base, have been placed under increased security. In Pennsylvania, Philadelphia International Airport has been closed, and of course the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall are being closed as well.
In fact, all national monuments, Tom, I believe, have been evacuated and closed.
In California, the state has been put on the highest alert. They're on tactical alert in Los Angeles. The Department of Energy's Nuclear Weapons and Research Complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, put under heightened security.
It is now coming up on 10:59 East Coast time. We'll give you a recap of what we've seen so far in just a moment. Just a quick note from one of the hospitals downtown in New York City, where they say that hundreds of people have been burned from head to toe. This is from Dr. Stephen Stern at St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village. about 50 or 60 doctors and nurses standing by in scrubs. The entire entrance to the emergency room was lined with stretchers covered with white sheets. Doctors said the victims mostly had burns.
Of course, they're being treated in a number of area hospitals, including St. Vincent's, NYU. Downtown is just about 5 minutes away. As a spokesperson told us earlier, they've had a lot of experience dealing with problems at the World Trade Center from that February terrorist bombing in 1993. And obviously, they have all been mobilized, and emergency crews are working feverishly outside the World Trade Center.
The United States Pentagon has officially now announced that the plane crashes into the World Trade Center in downtown New York City was a terrorist attack. Abu, how do you pronounce that, Charles?
Abu Dhabi.
Television reports that the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, headed by
Naif Hawatmi,
has taken responsibility for these terrorist attacks in the World Trade Center.
Though there's no confirmation of that either.
That would rule out Osama bin Laden.
Mm-hmm. If in fact it can be corroborated somehow.
Obviously.
Yeah.
The Pentagon has also suffered an explosion and is being evacuated. The White House, the Sears Tower in Chicago, evacuated as well. The State Department officials are already releasing unofficial statements that the Palestinian terror organizations are claiming responsibility for these attacks. So. What are we hearing from NBC News?
I should mention, by the way, Tom, before we talk about terrorism, that another large plane crashed as well, just north of Somerset County Airport, 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a Boeing 767 that crashed around 10 o'clock this morning, and it is unclear whether the crash was related to the other crashes that took place this morning.
President Bush is en route back to Washington. The State Department has been evacuated. There's been that attack on the Pentagon. That has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. There will be an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. This is the most serious attack on the United States since Pearl Harbor. There has never been a terrorist attack of this magnitude, in fact, on any country in the world so far as we can tell. The untold loss of life in New York alone. We only know that there have been hundreds of burn victims brought to various hospitals. Both Twin Trade Tower centers have collapsed to the ground. That's a densely populated area, obviously. We don't know the number of casualties yet at the Pentagon, and we don't know the number of deaths in that plane that went down, as Katie pointed, north of Pittsburgh.
And what we've left out a piece of information, and we know for a fact that one of these planes that was crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked from Boston this morning. It was American Airlines Flight 11 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. We had reports it had been diverted to JFK, and a short time later, perhaps while feigning a landing at JFK, it veered dramatically into the World Trade Center.
All air travel has been stopped. Airports have been closed across the country to planes departing. In terms of planes that are en route, it is unclear if they've made emergency landings or if they're reaching their final destinations. The White House has been evacuated. The State Department, the CIA has been evacuated. Of course, many, many buildings in Manhattan and lower Manhattan have been evacuated as well.
And transatlantic flights to this country are being diverted to Canada. Still, no claim of responsibility that is verifiable or credible at this time. Yasser Arafat has condemned this attack, saying it's shocking and appalling.
Of course, we should mention back in February of 1993 was when that bomb went off in the garage of the World Trade Center, killing 6 people, injuring 1,000 people. And that, of course, was an unbelievable scene. But compared to this
is what they intended to do back then.
Minor. Let's go to Bob Hager, who has some information for us. Bob?
Okay, I was just thinking as you commented there about the various planes involved. The one that we know of so far, because it's confirmed by American Airlines, is that Flight 11, which had been scheduled from Boston's Logan Airport to Los Angeles, that Flight 11 was hijacked this morning, and it is presumed that it may have been one of the planes that went into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. There were at least 2 more planes involved in this because the other tower was hit, and then the Pentagon was also, there were eyewitness accounts that it was a plane that went into the Pentagon, but so far we don't know the sources of those planes, whether they were commercial planes that had been hijacked, whether they were private planes, whether they'd been hijacked at all. And I would point out the report from Somerset County, Pennsylvania, is so far just local authorities commenting. The FAA has not confirmed that crash, so we're waiting to hear more, and I'm hearing just now, bear with me,
Bob.
oh, FAA is now confirming, so this adds to those earlier rumors that there are several airplanes that are unaccounted for. So there were some rumors that there might have been other planes hijacked that we didn't yet know the outcome of it, and now the FAA is confirming that. There are several, was the word I heard, several planes that are unaccounted for that were evidently hijacked and has not come to a conclusion yet.
Bob, we'd like you to get a list of as many of those as you can, as specifically as possible. We're going to show you now, we're going to replay a tape of the second attack on the World Trade Center in slow-mo. There's the plane. As you can see, a large airline-type plane. And now the collision. It's flown deliberately into the second one.
When they say several, Bob, do they give you any indication of what they're talking about?
Well, is the description that I had, and that was just passed on to me a moment ago, so I wasn't talking personally to the FAA person, but several is the account I had.
And Bob, American Airlines, the Flight 11 out of Boston, do we know what exactly kind of plane that was and perhaps how many people were on board?
We do not yet, but I think we're going to get some additional information from American. They were supposed to be adding comment to this from Dulles Airport here in a few moments, so we might learn a little bit more about that. But right now, it's very important to worry about rumors and so forth. I'd like to hear some more confirmation that a plane really has crashed in Pennsylvania, for instance, since the FAA hasn't confirmed that. But I think one needs to be very careful here in this chaotic situation.
We have a report here now from...
That's Metro Source News, yeah.
Okay, what is it, Chuck?
That U.S. fighter jets are said to have been deployed in an apparent search and destroy mission. This is quoting CNN, reporting that F-16s have been scrambled to find a suspected hijacked plane believed to be heading toward the nation's capital. Part of the Pentagon, according to this report, part of the building there has collapsed following the apparent terrorist attack there. And the Associated Press is reporting that the aircraft that was flown into the Pentagon was an A-10 Airbus, which is a very large, also a large commercial-sized plane.
The Long Island Railroad is stopping its trains into New York City and Brooklyn. Metro North stopping all trains north of the 125th Street station. In Manhattan, all of the bridges and tunnels closed going into and obviously out of Manhattan, with the exception, I believe, of the George Washington Bridge. And they're encouraging people to leave Manhattan, I guess, unless they live there.
Apparently one deck of the George Washington Bridge, outbound only, I guess, is still, or at last report was still open. It could have changed.
All of the streets in Manhattan have been shut down to allow for emergency vehicles. It is an emergency of a magnitude unimaginable, and that is that both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed after having commercial airliners flown into them this morning. And they burned for about an hour, and then the South Tower collapsed, and then the other tower collapsed.
Yep.
And they are no longer there. So now what the devastation and damage in that area of Manhattan is
incalculable at this point, and literally thousands of, well, you just can't say. But I mean, apparently many, many, many people burned over, as it was described, head to toe, have been taken to whatever hospital facilities are able to accept them, and you can just imagine that they're all overwhelmed at this point.
The initial report we got this morning was from Warner Wolf, who lives about 7 or 8 blocks from the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. And that was one of we weren't sure what had happened to the first.
Correct.
To the first tower. Whether a bomb had exploded, but it was a huge gaping hole covering, an area covering the side of the entire side of the building, amounting to 10 or 15 floors.
Mm-hmm.
And
corner to corner, about 15 floors tall. Yeah.
It turns out now that there was a commercial airliner flown into the building,
and evidently that must have been. What information we have, that must have been the American Airlines flight number 11, that had been going from Boston, Logan, to Los Angeles, and then hijacked.
Did you give Charles now the same thing?
Mm-hmm. The timeline.
Why don't you just read this, Charles?
Well, here's the timeline from the Associated Press. Shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the first plane crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. The second aircraft crashed into the second tower shortly after 9 Eastern. President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida at the time. He went on the air, interrupted his scheduled event to call the crash an apparent terrorist attack and a national tragedy, and to announce that he would be departing Sarasota, canceling the event there and heading back to Washington as quickly as possible. Then an aircraft crashed near the Pentagon, apparently in the heliport area just outside Washington in Northern Virginia. That was about an hour after the attacks here in New York. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol, the White House, the State Department, the CIA, were all shut down, some of those evacuated. The FAA then shut down all aircraft movement nationwide, permitting only those planes that were already airborne to go ahead and reach their destinations. Then shortly after 10 Eastern, One World Trade Center, the South Tower, struck by the hijacked airliner, collapsed. American Airlines then announced that one of their flights, American Air Flight 11, was involved. Then senior law enforcement officials say a car bomb blew up outside the State Department in Washington. Federal Protective Services later denied that car bomb attack occurred at the State Department. Financial markets suspended all trading. Then officials at Somerset County Airport in Pennsylvania reported that a large plane there had crashed in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. That is still developing. We don't have a final word on that. Then the second tower of the World Trade Center at 10:28, that collapsed to the ground, and the World Trade Center of New York City was gone. There was a fourth explosion which hit the collapsed remains of the World Trade Center. That occurred 10 minutes later at 10:38 Eastern Time. And then authorities all across the country went on a condition of high alert, tightening security at strategic facilities, evacuating all sorts of high-profile buildings, and U.S. monuments and museums were all closed. And, of course, the Securities and Exchange Commission, all financial markets closed for the day. The area of Manhattan, the borough of Manhattan in New York City, is about a frozen zone in order to permit emergency vehicles to get about that area, and that's about it.
The White House, the Pentagon, Capitol Hill, all have been evacuated. Mm-hmm. The president probably back in, I would think, close to being back. It's about a 3-hour flight.
Yeah.
So back to Washington, D.C., so he's probably not back yet, but he's on Air Force One, which is like a situation room. And I would imagine, what they're obviously doing. And leaders of Congress have been taken to secure locations. It's been described, this is certainly the most serious attack on any nation since Pearl Harbor, and certainly on this nation.
If not, as Tom Brokaw pointed out, perhaps any country on earth has not gone through something like this, what has happened here today.
There isn't any, I mean, there's no way to describe it, really. And of course, to try to get information at this point, and we're monitoring everybody.
Right.
NBC News and CBS News.
And all the wire services.
And we have everything at our disposal, and there really is little or no information. We've been listening to a feed from NBC News. What are they doing now, Lou?
Get almost everybody out that we could early on. After the first
This is the
two
police
crashes, when the
officer being
planes
talked
hit
here
the
by
building, there was roughly
one of
about, I
NBC's
would say, what, an
reporters.
hour and 15 minutes between that and the point where the South Tower collapsed, give or take. How many people you were able to get out? Do you have any idea?
We don't know. We tried to do a floor-by-floor search. New York City Police, the Fire Department, Port Authority Police, best they could, tried to get everybody out. But as you know, there were people still coming out after that building came down.
Do you have any idea how many people would normally be in the building at 8:30 or north? This is the director of the
There's possibly 10,000 people in each tower. 10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day. And we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building...
Let's go to Warner Wolf now, who is about 7 blocks from where the World Trade Centers used to be. Warner?
Yeah, hi, man. We just heard another an explosion. Now, it could be because buildings, perhaps, there's so much smoke. You could have a building on fire, maybe some kind of gas blew up, or, we assume it's not a terrorist bomb or something. But the problem is where the Trade Center was, it collapsed, it hit other buildings, and you've got major smoke and fire down here. That's the problem. This black smoke, it is, it's like, again, the comparison is like, the Arizona at Pearl Harbor. I mean, I've never seen any smoke like this. It's just a mass, and it's black, and it is covering the lower part of Manhattan. Now, the only good thing is, the wind seems to be blowing toward the east rather than toward the north, where you have more buildings. The thing, when it happened, I told you this morning about 10 minutes to 9 when I was in bed, and I heard that huge, I heard the plane first. Man, that plane's flying low, and then, boom, the explosion, and then my wife opened up the windows, and we saw the hole in the first tower. And then, it was about 10 minutes later, we saw the hole in the second tower, but we didn't see a plane. The reason is the first plane came from the north, going south, hitting the first tower. The second plane came from the south, going north, and hit the other side of the second tower. That's why we didn't see the plane from the second one.
Yeah.
But Imus, I tell you, this, I realized those were people falling or jumping from the tower. You remember I said earlier, I said, gee, it looks like debris, but you could see the difference in debris, and there were people, and then to see those towers just fall and disappear, it's indescribable. And now that building that I'm looking. That building is on fire. Oh, it is. That building is on fire. The building that was directly behind the Twin Towers is on fire. That's a huge building. It's south of that used to be the Western Union building.
Oh.
That building's on fire. That's a tall building.
It is 17 after the hour here in the Imus Morning Program. We're talking with Warner Wolf. 17 after 11, did I say? We're talking with Warner Wolf. Both World Trade Centers have collapsed. Both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed.
Imus, this is not good. This building is a tall building. If that, and there's smoke coming from the top, that you could have the same effect. That building could collapse. That's a huge bill. I would say that's got to be about 70 floors. Oh, this is you just hear sirens and everything down here.
It looks, Warner, in the shot, they're shooting from the harbor back up toward the Battery, toward the lower end of Manhattan, and just to the casual eye, there is so much smoke and so much dust that it looks literally like the lower part of Manhattan itself is on fire.
Yes.
It's just unbelievable. Shocking, just this particular view.
I see some helicopters coming around. around, but
You're
God.
watching, switch over to NBC News, Warner.
Okay.
And
right.
you'll see the shot that we're seeing. That is the shot that we're looking at.
Okay.
And as you can see, it appears, as Charles described it, as though the lower half of Manhattan
Oh.
was on fire.
Yeah. Now I'm in front of this. I'm looking. I'm looking from north to south.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking south.
And this is over the bay from south to north.
Yeah,
this particular camera
right.
shot.
Your shot is looking north. So in other words, the World Trade Center would have been between us. It's almost like, well, put it this way: if the wind wasn't blowing toward the east, I don't think I'd be able to tell you anything.
Oh.
Because the smoke would just be coming north and would obliterate everything.
Yeah.
I'd see nothing.
Well, all airports in this country has been shut down. The FAA has grounded all planes in the country. The only planes allowed to land are the ones that are in the air. All of the airports in Canada have been shut down. All international flights that were on, that were originally destined to land in this country were diverted to Canada. And I presume that they'll be allowed to land. And then those airports, as I just said, have been closed. Again, both World Trade Centers had commercial airliners inexplicably flown into them this morning. You can imagine the damage that ensued there, and then they subsequently collapsed. And they collapsed in an area, in one of the most densely populated, certainly one of the more denser areas in terms of buildings. Any place on the planet, except maybe Hong Kong or someplace like that. But the amount of damage is incalculable, and the number of people either dead or injured there's not any way to there's not even any way to comprehend that. There was a report this morning that let's go to NBC News now.
Tom, we've just been told we're being evacuated. You can see all the emergency workers walking north on the West Side Highway in New York. We've been told by firefighters here that there is a report of a bomb in this building. This is a school, a high school right here. And as you can see, they're moving everybody away from this building. They've said that there's a bomb in the building. They are evacuating us north now. That is according to firefighters on the scene. And we're going to move out of here right now just to keep ourselves safe. So we're going to start walking north ourselves. But that's what we're being told by New York City firefighters here, that there were reports of a bomb in that high school right there. It's called Stuyvesant High School. And so we are walking north to get out of the way. You can see just to my left here, these are even the ambulances which were down there are being moved north. The firefighters are being moved north. Everybody is being moved north. We're being asked by the police now to go north and get out of the way. Officer, do you have any idea of what the problem is?
There's a report of a secondary device possibly in the area of this school, so they're going to move everybody back as a precaution.
Secondary device meaning a bomb?
Possibly.
Okay, and where did that report come from? Was it called in?
It came in over our radios, and it's reported through our supervisors on down, so we're pulling everybody back.
And that's in the Stuyvesant High School right there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Officer McQuaid. That's Officer McQuaid of New York City Emergency Service.
Pat, that school has been evacuated?
Yeah, well, I don't think there was anyone in the school, Katie, this morning. At this point, I think everybody had been evacuated from here probably when the first events took place early this morning, just because of the fact that it's so close to the World Trade Center. Most of these buildings around here have been evacuated, so I would imagine, I never saw any kids going into that school this morning, so I'm going to presume that they never even allowed them to get to school this morning, and that anywhere that were here at 8:45 were probably moved out almost within moments after the crash took place, because it literally is only about 10 blocks north of here, and I haven't seen any students coming in or out.
All right, Pat Dawson, thank you very much. The big story, obviously, that is still to be resolved is how many planes were hijacked. We now have a report that there could have been as many as 4 of them. We know that 2 planes were involved here at the Twin Trade Towers. There's a report of a plane down north of Pittsburgh. Another kind of plane went into the Pentagon, but there could still be planes in the air that are under the control of hijackers. We don't know for sure what flights they are or where they're headed. There are some unconfirmed reports of them. We can only tell you that American 11 and American 77 have been identified by American Airlines as two of the planes that were involved in the incidents today.
And the hijackings are scattered somewhat around a fairly wide area, and we just have to remember that two of these planes did arrive at the World Trade Center within 18 or 20 minutes of each other, just to, again, point out the coordination of this attack. We're going to go down to NBC's Tim Russer, who is standing by with more information. Tim? Tim? Apparently Tim can't hear us.
All right, obviously people are scrambling to get as much information. I think we do now
Tim,
have
do you
Tim's
hear us?
audio. Tim?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please give us your information.
I've been just speaking to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Porter Goss, and we're trying to get him on the telephone here and continue our conversation on the...
This is a special report from News Channel 4.
And once again, I'm Jane Hansen with Glenn Walker in the News Center, News Channel 4 studios, and we want to bring you up to date on the situation right here in New York City, so we are interrupting the network for just a
that was
short
idiotic, wasn't
it?
To cut from Russer? Absolutely.
What's gone on here?
Well, as one distressed witness described, a piece of America went down today. An unprecedented terrorist attack, as you have seen all morning, on New York City, the nation's capital. We know of at least 4 planes that have been hijacked. It all started a little before 9 o'clock this morning. A commercial airliner, probably a small plane.
Let's eliminate that. We don't know the 4 planes have been hijacked. That's the first thing we don't know. We know the 2 planes were hijacked.
Yes, we do.
So,
we do know from American Airlines that they were flights 11 and 77.
So the problem is you can't get any accurate information from these morons because they want to speculate on who they think the attackers were and to try to paint word pictures when we simply need to report what happened. All federal buildings in New York and Washington, D.C. are now closed. 2 commercial airliners hijacked and flown into both World Trade Centers this morning, both towers of the World Trade Center, rather, and then both towers subsequently collapsed. Go ahead.
Well, those were the 2, were both American Airlines flights, 11 and 77, were the 2 involved in the World Trade Center incidents.
Why don't you monitor NBC and see if they get Russert back? And okay. What else do you have, Charles?
That's all, man.
Just to bring you up to date in the event you just turned the radio on. Here's what happened. Beginning shortly before 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, a plane crashed into a tower of the World Trade Center, and it caught fire. And about 20 minutes later, a second plane, which we actually saw live on television, crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. President Bush is in Sarasota, Florida, at a reading conference with kids and stuff. He accurately described it as a national tragedy. Got on Air Force One and is on his way back to Washington. An aircraft then crashed near the Pentagon just outside of Washington about an hour after both of these attacks in New York City. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol White House, were all evacuated. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. They were going to allow the planes, obviously, that were in the air to land, which makes sense. Senior law enforcement officials say a car bomb exploded outside of the State Department of Washington, D.C. We don't know what damage that caused. The financial markets then obviously were closed. And then at about, I forget exactly what time it was, but around 10 o'clock Eastern Time, One World Trade Center, the South Tower, collapsed. And then about 28 minutes later, in fact, exactly at 10:28 Eastern Time, the second tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. Just as though you were watching them dynamite one of these buildings someplace and take them down, they both collapsed. And so at this point, that is about all we know.
There's one more piece of information. According to out of Fort Worth, Texas, American Airlines is saying it lost 2 aircraft carrying 156 people. So evidently, American 11 and American 77, the flight numbers, I am assuming that is a total of 156 on board, but I can't assume. We don't know for sure.
And then the first report we got at FAN here in New York was from Warner Wolf, who happens to live in Lower Manhattan, about 7 blocks from the World Trade Center, and was an eyewitness to all of this. And, in fact, heard a plane flying overhead and said to his wife, man, that's flying pretty low, isn't it? And the next thing you know, it flew into the World Trade Center. That was the initial attack. They went into the North Tower, I guess it is, or was. And then about 18 minutes later, another American Airlines plane flew into the other tower, the South Tower. And then at about 10 o'clock, that tower came down, the South Tower. And then at close to 10:30, at 10:28, the other tower collapsed. And the damage and the devastation and the fatality and the death toll is incalculable at this point.
Right, literally inestimable.
And the smoke engulfing the lower end of Manhattan looks as though the whole city's on fire. Now, clearly some sort of, I hate to speculate on any particular, I don't have any idea what I'm talking about, but I'm simply reporting to you about the information we have, and we're monitoring everybody. But I'm a moron, and that's what could be actually described where I am at this point in terms of what information we have. But it does appear to be obviously some sort of orchestrated attack.
Yes,
certainly on a World Trade Center, and it's pretty easy to surmise that it would be, as well as the plane that flew into the heliport at the Pentagon, and reportedly a portion of the Pentagon has also collapsed.
And the shutdown of all air traffic in this sector of the world now has international airlines scrambling to divert or cancel flights to the United States. Cancellations and diversions causing massive confusion and congestion now all over Europe. All the European airports, as they try to either turn flights around, in mid-course, or simply not let. So it's just unimaginable.
Well, in effect, they're going to shut down the world.
I was just going to say the ripple effect is absolutely, it will go right around the world.
Well, they're going to shut down the planet.
Yeah.
Wherever
We have
they
Andrew
are.
Mitchell.
Here's Andrew Mitchell.
The department has been evacuated, so I am here in the Washington Bureau, and Secretary Eagleberger is exactly right. The view within this administration, as within prior administrations, is that this is an act of war, and that they do have plans. They have already, within the last 3 weeks, warned the Taliban government in Afghanistan that any act against the United States would be considered an act of war against the Taliban, against Afghanistan, or by the Taliban, I should say, and that retaliation would be done against Afghanistan. You will recall that after the embassy bombings in Tanzania and in Kenya, the U.S. did retaliate against Afghanistan and did retaliate against Sudan. That one, the latter, against Sudan, highly controversial because there were suggestions that they didn't have adequate evidence that Sudan was really implicated. But Secretary Eagleberger knows this as well as anyone, they're better than most. This is going to prompt military action by the United States. The immediate problem, of course, is how to respond to what could be an ongoing crisis, given the fact that we have other airplanes that may or may not have been hijacked, and that buildings are still being secured, that we had an incident at the Pentagon today. The State Department has been evacuated. The NSC top officials are right now in the Situation Room conducting meetings. Other NSC officials are across the street in the old executive office building, but everyone else is out of the White House. At the CIA, George Tenet, the director of Central Intelligence, is in meetings with his top officials, not in his normal operations center, not in his office, but in a special secure location. The State Department Operations Center has been moved out of its location to another location in Virginia.
Mr. Secretary Lawrence Eagleberger, you're still with us. If you are, what happens? You've worked for a great many years in government. What happens in the Situation Room? What does the president do with his advisors?
Well, assuming that this president acts like most presidents, he will gather them together and he'll ask for advice, and in the last analysis, he will make up his mind on what ought to be done. He'll have to hear from particularly his military advisors on what is available to react. You'll have to hear from Secretary Powell on how you deal with the other governments around the world to explain what it is we're doing, assuming we decide to do something. And by the way, I hope it's more than what we did when we responded to some of the last time. We need to, this is massive, the retaliation has to be massive, and I might say, I don't care very much about which terrorists they're going after. If they are clearly terrorists and they are antagonistic to the U.S., they ought to be considered, although it is also true that Osama bin Laden ought to be target number one. But anyway, the president will go through the discussion, and in the end, he will ask for
suggestions on what ought to be done. They will put together a program and a plan, and he will bless it, and then they will go off and do it.
Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you a few more questions about Osama bin Laden, who increasingly, as the minutes and hours move on, is now probably the focus of our investigation into this very sophisticated and highly coordinated attack that took place beginning shortly before 9 o'clock this morning. We want to show our viewers who are just now joining us some of the videotape. The first tower had been struck, and there is the second plane, a terrorist attack, a hijacked American commercial jetliner crashing into the Second World Trade Center within an hour. Both towers collapsed to the ground. We heard NBC's Pat Dawson interviewing authorities. They anticipated that there were as many as 10,000 people inside each of these buildings when the day began. And as you see the collapse of the second building, it is unclear how many of them were still trapped inside, how many of them were able to get out. People on the ground as well died. To update also, beyond just Manhattan, the Pentagon, also the target of a terrorist attack, apparently, according to eyewitness, a jetliner that had been, we presume, hijacked as well, crashing into the Pentagon. United Airlines now confirming a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. In all, it is believed 4 hijacked planes, bringing so much horrific destruction. Also, we should tell you, planes across America have been grounded. Airports are closed. The nation's capital has been evacuated. The White House evacuated. And once again, you see the second crash of a hijacked jetliner into the World Trade Center towers that then came tumbling down.
There are a series of reports to give you from all across the United States. Governments, state governments reacting everywhere to what has happened. We'll bring you a list in just a moment, but let's go to Lester. He has an update for us.
All right, we're getting a little more information about the planes used in the attack of the World Trade Center. American Airlines is providing information now. Says two of its airplanes were hijacked, both used in the attacks on the Trade Center. One was Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. It was hijacked. That plane driven into one of the towers. The other plane was Flight 77. I don't have information yet on the kind of airplane involved there. American says those two planes carried a combined 156 people. Both of the attacks of the World Trade Center involved hijacked American Airlines planes. Keep in mind there were 2 United planes hijacked today. As you reported, the 757 from Newark to San Francisco is the one that apparently went down near Pittsburgh or in Pennsylvania. The other United flight, 175 from Boston to LAX, also hijacked. We have not confirmed the status of that airplane other than it was apparently hijacked, that according to the FBI. So we now know that both of the American planes were used in the New York attacks. United Airlines has apparently also lost 2 planes to hijackers as well. Greg, Chris?
Let me go back to former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and let me read from Reuters, Mr. Secretary. Quote, "It is most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interests in an unprecedented attack, a very big one." This, according to the editor of the London-based Arab newspaper. Mr. Secretary, given that the warning was well known, and certainly American intelligence must have known about it, and given the fact that we knew that Osama bin Laden favors the use of aircraft and has launched a couple of attacks, one of which was actually defeated before it took place through intelligence, how is it we could not have known about this?
Well, I think that's fairly understandable. You said, or somebody said, that this was highly sophisticated and very well planned, and I think that's true, including, obviously, the ability to keep the thing quiet, and obviously also it required a great deal of money, which leads you again back to Osama bin Laden. The one thing I don't understand, and it's critical to the rest of this, I guess, is, as I said, I thought we had licked the problem of hijacked aircraft in this country. It can only tell me that there was really sloppy procedures at these airports if, in fact, they were able to get on these aircraft and then hijack them. If we hadn't if we had been able to prevent that, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. What I have to say I don't understand is the ability to hijack these aircraft. I thought we had that under control. Once you've got these aircraft in your hands, it's awfully hard to see how, unless we had fighter aircraft over New York City, it's awfully hard to see how we could have prevented what happened. That isn't to say that there wasn't an intelligence failure. Clearly there was. Having said that, I'm prepared to say that I don't think that was unexpected half as much as this ability to hijack these aircraft. That I simply do not understand.
Former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, many thanks. We appreciate it, sir.
A privilege.
Chris?
A police official now saying, on the condition of anonymity to the Associated Press, that the number of casualties from today's attacks on the World Trade Center could be in the thousands. You only had to look at the pictures to understand the enormity of the potential for loss of life. Estimated at least 10,000 people in each tower at the time of the attack. Felipe Iola was on the 81st floor when a plane struck the tower. He is on the phone with us now. Were you in the first or the second tower, sir?
I was in the second.
Tell us what you saw and heard and what happened.
I was actually on 81 and on 2 World Trade and then an explosion, and it was in 1 World Trade, and I saw the flames. I ran down to 78, which is the main concourse, where I met up with my wife and co-workers, and then I was asked to go back upstairs because it was safe, and the problem was only in 1 World Trade. And then when I went upstairs, I left my wife there, told her it was okay. I went up to 81. I was looking out the window with a co-worker of mine as another explosion happened, and the entire room just collapsed on me. And I was able to find stairs, and I can't find my wife, and I'm looking around now for her. So if she's listening, I just want to let her know that I'm okay, and I'm trying to find her.
I believe that I'm going to go through my notes right now, and we are being told that there is a place, sir, where you can call the Red Cross. They are trying to do some tracking. 877 Red Cross. You can call 877 Red Cross, and they may be able to give you some information. They are trying to keep track of people. We wish you the best. I do not want to keep Mr. Iola on the phone when he does not know where his family is. You can call 877 Red Cross. Please let us know if your family is okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
We are now learning that there is another bomb threat, and Greg, while you go to that, let me tell you a number of things that are happening across the United States. Government buildings in Washington are closed. There are a number of evacuations all across the country, building closings across the country, from the Space Needle in Seattle being closed as a precaution. Government buildings all across the country are on a state of high alert and have been closed. Greg, what are you learning from the hot note?
Dateline Cleveland from Associated Press. Mayor Michael White now says a Boeing 767 out of Boston has made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns it may have a bomb. So, the threat continues. We are on
All 4 Disney parks have now been closed in the Orlando area. Presumably, there are evacuations there, but all 4 Disney parks in the area of Orlando, Florida, have been closed. In Los Angeles, police have gone on tactical alert. Governor Gray Davis has convened a meeting of the State Emergency Council. We understand that in Massachusetts, the acting governor, Jane Swift, has moved government operations to a bunker. Federal buildings in West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware have been closed. Maryland has closed all of its public schools. Now let's go over to Lester.
Chris, I'm looking at the airplanes involved here and have concluded, just based on the information, that in air traffic control centers, they must have known something was up. Let's take, for example, the American Flight 11. It's a 767 going from Boston to L.A. New York City is not one of the places it will cross over.
Think about the experiences of
thousands of Tom Brokaw
who were down there in the epicenter of all that, and were there when it occurred.
That's embarrassing.
And we don't know what the numbers are yet.
And you hear about Cardinal Egan delivering last rites outside of St. Vincent's Hospital.
And the magnitude of this will go on for some time. This is not just a national tragedy, but this is a national security event of an untold magnitude that this country is going to have to deal with. The president's coming back, and we are at war, in effect, here. This country has suffered a devastating attack that will cost us in the sense of in the loss of life. It will also cost us in terms of our psychological security that we have in this country. We're going to have to revisit a lot of our freedoms as a result of this kind of an attack. And then, of course, there's the whole question of retaliation.
This is an
Who is responsible and what do we do?
Tom, this is an upsetting wire that just came across the transom from the West Bank. It says thousands of Palestinians celebrated Tuesday's terror attack in the United States, chanting God is great and distributing candy to passers-by, even as their leader, Yasser Arafat, said he was horrified. The U.S. government has become increasingly unpopular in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in the past year of Israeli-Palestinian fighting, with many Palestinians accusing Washington of siding with Israel.
For those of you who think that events in far-off places like the Middle East or in Afghanistan or in the subcontinent or in places in Asia have no effect on us, this is the answer today. This place remains an enormous target in the eyes of a lot of people, and we are so vulnerable because of all those things that make us so great, our freedoms and our sense of security that we have. But America has been changed today by all of this.
We want to go and find out more about what's being done for those who were injured in these attacks. Leslie Van Sant is with the American Red Cross. I believe she's joining us from Washington. Ms. Van Sant, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Matt.
Tell me what kind of resources you have available to you to pour into these areas where, obviously, in Lower Manhattan and in Washington, D.C. and outside Pittsburgh.
Well, our chapters on the area are local disaster volunteers. You know, they are, of course, the first people on the scene and responding. Unfortunately, probably now some of them are also victimized by the event. We're also mobilizing 80,000 units of blood to transfer to the regions as needed, and, you know, taking guidance from emergency management personnel on what assistance we can provide to them to make this, you know, response go smoothly.
Is there anything that, I mean, I know it's early after this has happened, but is there anything you can think of that people might be able to help you out with in terms of donating certain things? You mentioned blood and those things.
Well, you know, we're asking people who are in other parts of the country who are blood donors or maybe not blood donors, maybe they could call and schedule an appointment so we can make sure that the supply stays ready. Our disaster volunteers, our mental health volunteers and health volunteers are going to be responding. You know, this will, as Tom mentioned earlier, this is going to be a long, long response. The emotional trauma, the emotional impact is going to be felt weeks, months into the future, even years. So we're going to be working very hard at this for a long time.
All right, Leslie Van Sant with the American Red Cross. Ms. Van Sant, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Kathleen Zici of New York University Hospital, which is about 5 minutes away from the World Trade Center, where many of the victims have been brought. Kathleen, I know we spoke to you about an hour or so ago. Can you tell me what's going on in the hospital now? Okay, apparently we're having some problems with Kathleen, and I'm sure it's as chaotic there as it was at St. Vincent's, where we heard from Bob Bazell moments ago that there was a line with Cardinal Egan outside delivering last rites to some of the dead who were brought to the hospital. So we'll try to touch base with Kathleen in just a moment. But first we want to go to Andrea Mitchell once again in Washington. Andrea?
I've been told that the State Department evacuation, Katie, was precautionary only. There was no car bomb, as had at least been reported or rumored, not here on NBC. But in any case, that was precautionary only. There are still some officials there. They are now being redeployed to another location in Virginia. The CIA is still operational. Intelligence officials are still meeting at Langley, but those officials have also evacuated the non-essential employees. The current working theory, as you have been reporting and speculating, is that there is only one terror organization in this world that could coordinate this kind of event, and that would be something operated by Osama bin Laden. Intelligence officials say he is in Afghanistan, where he has been protected by the Taliban, and as we know, the United States has warned the Taliban government of Afghanistan that if there were any attacks against the United States, that they would hold Afghanistan responsible, so that we most likely will expect retaliation, military retaliation. But I think right now the full focus of the U.S. government is on finding out how many other possible targets there might be, how many vulnerabilities there might be, making sure that there is no chemical or biological element out there. I spoke to a former Secretary of Defense, Bill Cohn, and others who had been part of the anti-terror operation planning, and they say that those are the first lines of defense to make sure that there is not some other event, unexpected as this obviously was, that could make Americans vulnerable. Obviously, this is the largest intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor.
All right, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thank you. We're going to check in again right now with Kathleen Beachy of New York University Hospital. Kathleen, tell me what the scene is like at your hospital.
Well, we're at NYU Downtown Hospital in Lower Manhattan, and we have had a steady stream of patients coming through the door since the first explosion occurred some hours ago. We have information at this point on 3+ fatalities, plus because there may be additional fatalities that I have not yet been informed of. We have had a severe burn case. One individual is an amputee.
We're taking a feed from NBC News. Katie Curry talking to people at the hospital. I'm Imus. It's 11 minutes till noon here at WFAN in New York. Charles and I are on the air, and we're going to stay on the air until whatever.
Yeah.
But at this point, I guess we could bring you. Well, we don't know anything. Well, what will have to happen is that the security agencies in this country will have to make a determination as to where we are and what the situation is, and the president will have to make some sort of an announcement. But in the meantime, you can either get in or out of Manhattan, this just from Metro Networks Communications. 5 floors of the Pentagon have now collapsed, and a fire there is continuing to spread. A plane, again thought to be a commercial jet, smashed into the Pentagon earlier today. Fox News reports the blaze continues to rage out of control and is spreading to the inner rings of the Pentagon. So it could take the Pentagon down.
Unbelievable. There's a little more information. The first apparently official casualty report is that New York City officials are now saying as many as 165 bodies have been recovered, but this is very early, obviously, in the magnitude of this, following the dual collapses of the World Trade Center towers. Also, American Airlines had their news conference regarding their flights that were involved in all of this. One was Flight 11, a Boeing 767, Boston to Los Angeles. It had 81 passengers aboard, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Also involved was American Flight 77, which was a Boeing 757, operating from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. That makes a total of 156 people who were aboard those 2 planes. And there is news, a word from Associated Press, that United Airlines is now confirming a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco is the aircraft that has crashed near Pittsburgh, but there is no description of what type of plane is involved in that at this point.
9 minutes till the hour here on WFAN in New York. Let me just bring you up to speed on what has happened to this point. A plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center shortly before 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. A second plane crashed into the second tower, which we actually saw live on television shortly after 9 o'clock. President Bush then spoke from Sarasota, Florida, called the crashes an apparent terrorist attack, described it as a national tragedy, went out and got on Air Force One and began to fly back to Washington. And he's apparently on his way, perhaps has landed by now. And then an aircraft crashed near the Pentagon, just outside of Washington. The Pentagon's located, as you obviously know. And now we understand 5 floors of the Pentagon have collapsed, and that the fire there, according to Fox News, is spreading to the inner rings of the Pentagon. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol, the White House, were evacuated. The president on his way to the Situation Room, although Air Force One serves as a Situation Room, as you probably know. Then the leaders in both houses of Congress are then taken to a secure location and have been. Shortly after 10 o'clock Eastern Time, One World Trade Center, that's the South Tower, collapsed. Collapsed. Just as though you were watching them demolish a building in the South Bronx or wherever. Just like they took it down with dynamite. And then 28 minutes later, the other tower went down. What collapsed? These buildings are a quarter of a mile high, and they both collapsed. The reports have been confirmed that there have been 2 planes hijacked, and has it been confirmed that the third plane was hijacked?
It has not.
Okay. So it's being reported in some areas that there were 4 planes hijacked. There's no confirmation that, and no one knows that. And we were listening to the description of what is going on MSNBC, and it is so disgraceful and embarrassing that, I mean, now it's probably not the time to criticize news coverage, but at any rate, we were getting so much misinformation that we've now switched over to NBC News and to CBS News, either one, obviously, to get some fairly legitimate information, and there isn't much more that we know other than that.
We do know that a plane of airliner size was involved in the apparent attack on the Pentagon, and we do know now from United Airlines that one of its aircraft is down southeast of Pittsburgh. But we don't know what type of aircraft is involved in that, nor do we know if it is in fact related to these other events. As yet, the assumption is being made that most likely it is, but we don't know. We do not have confirmation.
Here's what's happened in New York. Shut down all subway lines. Cellular phone service is almost impossible.